Although it is an Irish event, I think 10 minutes late might be a little bit too much. Hello, Maura. So we will make a start. You're all very welcome. My name is Colin Barr. I am the director of the Keough-Naughton Institute for Irish Studies here at Notre Dame. And on behalf of Keough-Naughton and the Nanovic Institute for European Studies, and not just one, not just two, three sponsors tonight, and the Just Transformations to Sustainability Initiative, which I'm delighted to say is normally abbreviated JTS, so I don't have to say that every time. I want to welcome a really special guest here to Notre Dame, which is Eamon Ryan, the former Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, as well as Green Party leader in Ireland, who's been a leading figure in Irish politics for decades, really. And we've had Eamon here with us since Wednesday, I believe. A nice long visit. Already had a full schedule of engagements with our students, our faculty, staff here in the Keough School. You've attended, I believe, the Keough Institute's Integral Ecology Working Group, the Nanovic Institute Study Abroad Sustainability Fellows, as well as our own Keough School's Masters in Global Affairs students, various undergrads, including our Irish Studies undergrads at Keough-Naughton. I think you've got a sense over the last few days of just the range of things here at Notre Dame, people interested in sustainability and the environment, but also in Ireland and the intersections to that. So we want to thank you, Eamon, for generously sharing your time over the last few days, as well as with us tonight. I also want to thank my colleague, Professor Arun Agrawal, who's the inaugural director of the Just Transformations to Sustainability Initiative, JTS, who will be joining Eamon Ryan after his remarks for a conversation on sustainability issues and climate ambition. I'd also like to thank our collaborators at the Nanovic Institute and JTS for partnering with us on Eamon's visit to campus and for envisaging? I'm going to have to ask Ariel not to use that word in future lectures. Envisioning, there we go. Envisioning tonight's program with us. Housed in the Keough School of Global Affairs, the Keough-Naughton Institute and the Nanovic Institute are both investing in advancing the school's sustainability and environmental justice program. We are very glad to work together with our colleagues in JTS, who lead a university-wide effort to build a sustainable future where people and nature flourish together, and to deliver a broadly positive, solutions-oriented vision aligned with Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical. Lastly, we are very pleased to have tonight's event included as part of the 2025-2026 Notre Dame Forum's programming, which centers on the theme of cultivating hope. As Father Robert Dowd, the president of the university, commented, this year's forum theme is an invitation for our community here on campus and beyond to be seekers of truth, sustainers of hope, and builders of bridges. I think in the context of all the work, Eamon, that you have done through the years, both in Ireland and in Europe and further afield, building bridges and promoting sustainability and policy and practice in Ireland and Europe and globally, it's only a natural fit that tonight's program would take place as part of this year's forum. Now, I want to briefly introduce our two speakers. Eamon will have some remarks to make, and then he'll join Arun on the stage for some discussion. Eamon Ryan, as I said, was Minister for the Environment in the Irish government from 2020 to 2025, and leader of the Green Party in Ireland from 2011 to 2024, and almost a really quite unprecedented run as a major political party leader, I think, in recent times, and certainly in modern politics. That's an astonishing run. He stepped back from elected politics in January this year, and is currently serving as chair of the European Affordable Housing Advisory Board. He is a high-level advocate for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, a UN affiliated agency looking to tackle short-lived climate pollutants. He lives in Dublin with his wife, the writer Victoria White, and their 4 adult children, including one set of twins, I now know, about which we were comparing notes. Give up all hope, ye who enter here, was the sum of the advice. My colleague Arun Agrawal is the Pulte Family Professor of Development Policy at the Keough School of Global Affairs and the inaugural director of the Just Transformations to Sustainability Initiative here at Notre Dame. His research and teaching focus on environmental politics and sustainable development. His fieldwork has taken him to more than 20 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and his research has found support from both public and private foundations around the world, including the National Science Foundation, the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Defense, several of which still exist. On that note, it is a real pleasure to welcome first Eamon Ryan, but also Arun Agrawal here at Notre Dame, and all of you to join us, I think, on this very important topic and hugely interesting one. And Eamon, I will give this floor to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Colin, and good evening, everyone. I am very honored to be here. we've done a lot of work together. Notre Dame have been really good in Ireland in recent years, in the McGill Summer School, in their centre on Stephen's Green, and I really appreciate that, and I'm thrilled to be here in person. When I was invited, I kind of said, I'm loving to come. I'll talk climate, I'll talk energy, talk politics, but I said more than anything else, I wanted to meet the theologians. And I'll explain to you why in these few introductory comments before we have our conversation later on. But I wanted to speak about cultivating hope and climate change and what we can learn from Ireland. I might just start slightly bigger frame though, just where we are in the world today, look at what's happening in Europe as well as what's happening in my home. And I do that because on Thursday, for the 30th time, the world, 197 countries will come together in Belém on the mouth of the Amazon for this meeting of the parties to try and assess where are we on meeting climate change. And I maybe wanted to start there because it is critical. If I've been involved in those negotiations in recent years, and you sometimes have to pinch yourself, if we don't get this right, what is the consequences? I met Phil Sakamoto the other day here, the head of the Minors in Sustainability, and I trust physicists when it comes to this, because what he said to me, and I see as real, is that the science is actually getting more troubling. The modelling maybe has underestimated the risks and the scale of change that's taking place, the speed of the change that's taking place. So it is so important, in my mind, that we get these negotiations right. I wanted maybe just to start with the slightly hopeful message in that regard, because you think at the moment you could give up, that all is lost. There's multilateralism is in deep trouble. How can we possibly manage it? I would say first and foremost that what will help us is that we do have the Paris Climate Agreement. It has actually delivered and will deliver if we stick to the course. In Belém, the Brazilian presidency is not looking to major advance in negotiations. There's no big negotiation track that has to be agreed. Most of that's been done in the last 10 years, implementing the rule book that was initially set out within the Paris Agreement 10 years ago. But just to give you some sense of hope, in the decade before the signing of that agreement in Paris, our emissions, the global emissions, went up by about over 18%. In the last decade, it's still grown. It has to stop, has to come down, but it went up 1.8%. So there's been a change. It is starting to work. We're starting to see that there are some tipping points in the positive as well as in the negative, particularly in the area of energy. COP focuses maybe too much energy, doesn't spend enough attention on agriculture and transport, some of the areas we need to change. But in energy, again, if you think back 10 years and where we are now, all the predictions at that time of what would happen in solar and wind power have been blown out of the water. It's grown 15 times faster than we predicted back 10 years ago. And it's transformation. It is a new industrial revolution that's taking hold across the world. There's now twice as much spent on clean energy as there is in fossil. There was only 1/5 back 10 years ago. So there is sign of hope and opportunity and possibility. What to look from COP? The global leaders will meet on Thursday and Friday. They break for the weekend, and then the ministers arrive on the following Monday and be there for 10 days. The Brazilians will look for what they call implementing an action plan rather than some big deal. They want something strong on forests, protection of the Amazon, and the indigenous people within such forests. I believe I'm working on in that role I have within the Climate and Clean Air Coalition on methane, which is the most virulent of climate gases. And most critically, we need further progress on the financing of the adaptation, because climate change is here. We have to keep, as Phil Sakamoto and myself were saying the other day, we've got to keep focusing on mitigation, otherwise all will be lost. But we also need to manage the crippling effects, like Jamaica this week. You could pick any week of the year, you'll see it happening. And they're the sort of progress areas that I expect to see on COP. In truth, I think probably the biggest issue, the political one, was does the rest of the world hold together and continue on the course? or does it accept and yield to the American presidency, which is saying that this is a hoax, this is a con job? And I think it's the holding together will be the most important signal, which I hope comes from COP. The European Union goes into it, usually with a bit of bravado, because Europe has been good on the whole climate issue, shown ambition, has actually reduced emissions significantly, but we are also not in a great place. We have not yet agreed, and it's only 3 days before the COP starts, our own what's called NDC, National Declared Contribution, which is central to the Paris Agreement. Everyone commits, and it's a voluntary system, but commits to what you're going to do. In Europe, we've delayed that. Now we have ambitious targets. We're likely to agree a target of something like a 90% reduction by 2040. And it's almost over the line, but we've been held back because we're hesitant at the moment in Europe. We're uncertain about our role in the world and this turbulent time in the world where geopolitics is under real strain. I expect we will get agreement before Thursday. And actually, my sense in the European Union is we don't have a choice. We are in a very frightening situation in the world, geopolitical strains. For Europe, though, you ask a simple question. I was at the Environmental Energy Ministers back earlier this year, and we were considering, do we stick with this green agenda? And actually, from a European perspective, if you think about it, how could we be competitive on burning other people's fossil fuels? We don't have our own. How could we be secure in that? And we've seen the security issue with the war in Ukraine being critical and central to us. And for that reason, my expectation is Europe will continue the course. In fact, we need to accelerate. And I think we need to collaborate and open up further trade and investment, even if that's not something that the American administration wants, in the clean alternative. I want to come to Ireland, and I look forward to our conversation. We can go back to a lot of the lessons from Europe or from the COP negotiations and the UN process. Ireland is a strange character in this place because historically we've had very high emissions. Not from industry particularly, but mainly from agriculture. 38% of our emissions come from agriculture, but also we're as car dependent a country as any, and we historically have not had a great record in protecting our environment in recent years. We've lost our pristine rivers to pollution. We have seen real difficulty in meeting the scale of ambition that we need to make. But in Ireland, I would argue too that that is actually changing. And if anything, they were a good example of a country which can maintain and grow an economy and still reduce emissions, which have reduced in recent years. Not as fast as we would like, but on a course that I think is inevitable, particularly in energy, where it is starting to really work. The average emissions of an Irish person from 2020 to 25 halved. You don't see that in reality because our population increased dramatically over the period, so the overall statistics don't reflect it. But when I say to Irish people, they're surprised because we tend to kick ourselves and think we're the worst in the world. 40% of our energy now of our electricity now comes from renewable power, and that's going to go to 80% in the next 7 years. I'm convinced of it. We're switching to offshore wind. We're doing some really good things in interconnecting with our neighbours. We've just only earlier this year opened up a new interconnector with the UK. We're currently building one with France. And I see this new clean industrial revolution as this balancing system between variable supply and variable demand. And that balance goes from those big interconnectors between UK and France down to your local home appliance or your electric vehicle outside where things start to switch up, or your heat pump which starts to switch on and off. Even in cloudy Ireland, we're seeing the solar revolution take hold. 100 houses every day with solar panels on the roof. It works. We've done some difficult things in my political lifetime. Some of the difficult things have cost us politically, but actually have delivered. We have a form of carbon taxation, which I think is the best in the world. We're a member of the European Emissions Trading System, ironically a system that was introduced back at the time of the signing of the Kyoto Agreement. The Europeans agreed to it because they thought the Americans would want it. Only for the Americans not to, the Senate, did it vote at 60-0 or did not a single senator, I think, got it through. So poor Al Gore had to go back tail between his legs. And meanwhile, Europe had committed to this carbon tax system. in the big industrial sector. But what we've done in Ireland is we've applied that down to every sector in the use of fossil fuels. Each year, the carbon tax goes up €7 a tonne, and we spend it on improving buildings, the majority going to people on very low incomes, on small farming, and on social welfare increases to protect against the fuel poverty that does come with the tax, or could if you didn't adjust in that way. We get now about $1 billion a year from it. That'd be 60 billion a year in American terms. And the great thing, I remember this as a minister, is that you know it's coming in because it's outside the budget cycle. We've committed to it for the 10 years and we're doing it. It's on track. So there are examples like that. There's a further example. As I said, we're probably as car dependent as Indiana in terms of creating a system which is designed over the last 50 years, very dispersed population. But even there, we're seeing public transport take off. 59%, I think, in the last 5 years, growth. And we're starting to switch even in agriculture. The number of organic farmers tripled in the last 4 years. And I'm absolutely confident that that won't stop. Now, politically, it's proven really difficult. We lost all our seats coming out of government back in 2011, partly because of the financial crisis, but also because when you're delivering real change, it's hard to hold people, because change is difficult. And that's the same in the most recent election, at the time when the tide was low on climate ambition. It was really hard. We lost all but one of our seats. We'll come back. We're resilient. But it's better to be honest about that in terms of the difficulty, particularly now we're getting to the point where we're not talking about targets, we're not talking about future plans, we're talking about delivering in the here and now. And that's when it gets tough, because vested interests subject, and it does involve changing the way society works to make it happen. That's what's going on in Ireland, and I can go into any of the details of it. But I wanted to speak as well, as I said, on the spiritual side of this. 10 years ago, when the Paris Agreement was signed, actually just running up to it, there were a number of significant developments. In September in New York, the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed. It was a powerful moment of collaboration where an Irish civil servant, David O'Donoghue, was actually the chief negotiator to get it over the line. 2 months later, and I remember to the day Laudato Si was published, I remember because I was never more excited, because it spoke truth to me that I'd sensed for 3 or 4 decades about this connection to nature and to God being central to how we advance our climate mission. Ian Kite is up at the back, very diplomatically, quietly. He knows Notre have also done some great work on the West Coast and the islands, on island of Inishbofin, where I'm particularly connected to, which has been really useful. But he will know that those locations is where our tradition comes from in Christian, in our golden age, that period on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, when monks clung onto the edge of Europe, the cutting edge of Europe. And I remember talking to French Sean McDonough recently, a Columban missionary priest, and I was asking him how we were chatting, and he said, you know what, Eamon, the first thing that their patron saint, St. Columban, wrote in Latin, he used to write Latin poetry, is that if you want to know the Creator, look at creation. That's the early Irish Catholic Christian tradition was deeply imbibed with a sense of connection to nature. And that helps me, as my mind today, to say, yes, this has been the way for a long time. We need to go back to that deep root and understanding. What I particularly like about it, when you read the historians, when you find out what the archaeologists discover and uncover for you, is that monastic tradition also became incredibly famous across Europe as they went to Bobbio and Ione and Lindisfarne and all the way across Europe. It became a real story at the time, that this was a thinking that actually had real attention across Europe. And they had a tradition that those from Europe had to come back to the source, to go to these small rocky islands on the west of Ireland, to learn from the people who had set this thinking in motion. And the tradition was you welcomed the visitor. You provided shelter. You provided education. And you provided learning. You shared your thinking. And that's not an unimportant secondary message for Ireland or other countries today, when that issue of how you welcome the visitor or someone who might be seeking learning or shelter is disputed. I said at the start there's a reason for hope because we've seen this industrial revolution take hold. And if America steps out for a decade or two, it will be to the cost of the Americas. I don't see it going back. But so we've had that, I put it in soccer terms. This is a decade of change, up to 2030. We're at half time and we're 3-1 down. We've scored one goal, which is the renewable revolution. But the 3 goals are own goals that we've scored are as follows. First is that there's still a north-south divide. The revolution is taking hold in US, in Europe, and in China, but not in the developing world. Africa, with 40% of the solar radiation, is only getting less than 2% of the investment. And that has to change. We will not get a multilateral agreement if you have such lopsided inequity in what's happening in this transition. The Catholic Church has a particular role to play. It's a universal church. It has connections. It has 2 popes now, one after the other, which is coming from this, what I understand is a Latin American theology of the people, where it's putting, and the Synod in the Amazon, and a whole range of other central messages which connect to this justice issue. The other 2 own goals are more political. That certain countries, and it's happening all over the world. This is a global consciousness at play, but a lot of politics are now playing climate as a vote getter, where you're saying it's not real. Those people are the elite. They're telling you what to do. They don't know what's right. Our third own goal, is that it has become, and this is slightly disputed, it slightly varies in different parts of the world, it's become an issue of cultural divide. Again, in both those, in the political one, not that the church would get involved in politics, but it has its social teaching, and Laudato Si is central to it now. And I think it needs to hold, and needs to spread, needs to be taken up as part of this social mission. And not just a social mission. In this cultural war, which we have to step away from, it's not a cultural war. In Ireland, we do a really detailed survey, 4,000 people interviewed at length. What's their views on climate? Climate change in the Irish mind is the survey. 85% or so of the people see climate change as real and want it addressed. And it does not vary between rich and poor, rural and urban, young or old. It's the same in most countries. In America, it's slightly less so because it has become a divisive issue. So we do need to switch that back. We need to stand on 2 feet, left and right, to be able to address what's coming. I think what really wins that people over, gets it back to the 80%, and those 80% wanting the scale of action we need, is actually speaking to the heart, speaking to the truth that if we don't do this, your twins and my twins face into a world which is deeply insecure, where we're handing them an incredibly, almost impossible situation to try and manage. And that sense of noble responsibility, that sense of love of life and wanting to pass it on and see it progress in our children, is actually central, I think, to it's a spiritual. And it's a spiritual message that doesn't just belong to the Catholic Church. At the same time Francis was writing Laudato Si, the Hindu leaders were writing, spiritual leaders were writing the exact same basic concept. Francis got it from Bartholomew, the head of the Orthodox Church, real strong ecological thinker. The chief imam in Cairo, the exact same thinking. It's ecumenical to its core, and even to those outside faith traditions. But I think the faith traditions have a particular role because they can speak to the heart. They can speak to that question that Columban would have known. Are we going to destroy creation here? Are we going to destroy God's incredible gift that we are lucky to be part of? And what Francis talks about, that inner conversion to want to address and to stand up for that protection of our next generation and of the world around us, I think is the motive that will work. It won't work if we try technocratic or econometric or even some political play. This is something bigger and broader that needs a wider horizon, the sort of thing you'd get out in those rocks looking out from the west of Ireland. Thank you.
Eamon, thank you for that inspiring, may I say, even rousing presentation, and especially at the end. I think what you say rings really so true to anybody who thinks about the future, and about the future not just of the planet, but of the people on it, of all the species on it. I got 3 questions from Leary. I'm going to adapt them because what you said is so striking that I feel it is important to talk more about some of what you said. I am myself not Catholic. I'm at a Catholic institution, and I've been struck by what Pope Francis said in the Laudato Si. I think there are many people in this country and in other parts of the world which often see religion with some suspicion. But the way you described what Pope Francis says in the Laudato Si, in the role of the Catholic Church, which is, as you rightly pointed out, is a global, is a universal church. How can we work more closely with the church? And how can we both draw upon what Pope Francis has said and a tradition that Pope Leo is continuing, but also contribute to what the church is doing to advance the call for integral ecology and for integral human development in the Laudato Si? What does your experience tell us about when is it that the combination of trying to advance a positive politics in the world work in relationship and in partnership with religion?
I don't know, because I've been trying that for 30 years, and with some success, but also with some failure, politically, certainly. We fell into the trap, even in the last government, when we knew that this is a trap that you have to avoid, of that sense of environmentalists versus farmers, let's say, as an example, where you lose people and the sense you're depicted as a divide. So the first thing I have to say is admit not having had, not always getting it right. Having learned from mistakes is probably the thing what you have to do. I think Francis, first of all, I loved, it's not just Laudato Si, it was the fact that he was self-declared sinner was one of the first things I heard him coming out with. And also what I also liked, Laudato Si was superb, but there was a follow-up letter he wrote, Laudato Deum, which really I found, I was involved in the climate negotiations in Dubai, and that was a letter to the negotiators, was my sense. And it was what I describe as a slap of a letter. What are you doing holding on to power or looking for power if you're not willing to meet the challenges of our time? So I think that is, I think in so many ways he was an inspiration. I think the way, and I'm sorry, I say I don't know, because I'm just about to take up a role. I think, I don't know if you said in my introduction, Colin, I've just been asked to join the board of the Laudato Si Global Movement. So I have to answer that question, not just here, but I have to answer it in the board when I go to my first meeting next month. And I've been thinking about it. I think I still stick to a very simple message that's at the heart and earliest days of the Green Movement, that we need to think global and act local, that we need to, you can't carry the whole burdens of the world on your shoulders. It's too difficult. It's too overwhelming. We just fill people with the sense of they're getting me to try and save the planet. How do I do that? Am I doing the right thing here or there? And I don't think that is fair, and I don't think it would be effective. But you can change your local, and you can change your local. I think start with your local environment is where I would think we need to go. And I think very much connect with what Francis does. It's integral in 2 or 3 ways. It's integral in putting climate change connected to the protection of nature and loss of biodiversity, and integral in terms of social advancement, social justice protection as well. And both are absolutely attainable by going in this local direction. Because that people do have a love of their place, home place. Speak to the home, protecting the home, the hearth in your own home, but in the surrounding environment. And let's address that. And actually, climate action will come in its wake. And secondly, I do believe, and I'm absolutely convinced this, the more I've seen of 30 years of doing it and delivering it, social justice inevitably comes when you take climate action. Because when you invest in public transport, it's socially progressive. It protects those who can't afford a car, aren't able to drive a car, and so on. So it delivers a stronger sense of community when you've got when you go back to active travel. It brings social change and benefits. And similarly, when you move towards energy efficiency, when you simplest things, improving your home, 50,000 houses a year now in Ireland retrofitting. And actually, as I said, we've put huge amounts of money into the lowest income households. And there's nothing better to address poverty than actually creating a healthier home, healthier and cheaper to run. And so I think what I'm going to say in the board meeting of the first board meeting I'm going to go to in the Laudato Si movement is that we should be thinking really local. I had an idea the other day where on this I was just starting to think about it because I might get a role, I think, in the board of trying to raise money. And I was thinking, how do you raise the money? Will I go to the big, please give me 5 million or 50 million? Actually, there was a tradition in Ireland. We had a thing when we were growing up, it's still there, called the Trochra box. It was a box you had during Lent, and it was on the kitchen table. And you put your 5pence, 10pence, 2pence, whatever into it, and you give it back at the end of Lent. And it was very much for development, for support in addressing poverty in Africa and elsewhere. And actually, in recent years, Trochra have been superb about putting climate at the centre of their whole Trochra Lenten campaign. And I think that, to my mind, might be the way to go about it. It's a very Irish political perspective. Daniel O'Connell did it to the greatest impact when he was delivering climate, Catholic emancipation. He believed in getting large numbers to do small things rather than necessarily making it all into some big. And so that, I know, sorry if it's that's slightly cliched, but thinking global, acting local, and then really engaging people at the local level. And in truth, that's not really happening yet at the moment. In the Laudato Si movement, in my mind, and elsewhere, it's there in the church as a form of thinking, but it's on the margins. It didn't feature in the whole synodal discourse. I mean, it did a footnote at the end, so listen, we haven't forgotten about this, we're going to come back to it. But so it needs to change. And we know this is not easy because we've been trying different ways for several decades. But that's how I think we might do it, is go back to local and address local environment, clean up your local river, put in your own local pocket park, deliver a street, change a street so that it's a sort of street where you can let go the hand of a 5-year-old and not be terrified they'd be run down as they run out. And addressing it in that way, I think, is where we need to go.
That's fantastic. And it is perfect for the second question that I wanted to ask you. You've done so much work, both, as Colin already pointed out, both in Ireland, beyond the COP, in communities. How do you think the inspirational work that is happening in so many communities, and which often gets sidelined or marginalized or is hidden from the view, and it relates also to how you think the example of Ireland can inspire similar actions elsewhere? What is it that is missing in so many places and is present in so many others that, Ireland, as you were saying, has successfully decoupled growth from emissions, and so have several other countries, but Ireland's example is immense. And similarly, there's so many communities where you see change happening that is both transformational and inspirational, and so many others where it doesn't. What is in your mind, and from your experience, what is the difference? And how can we learn from where we see successful outcomes? Is it about the openness of the heart? Is it about incentives? It's about, are the economists right? Do we need to get the politics right? How do we bring about change that's inspired by all the positive examples that we see around us?
I think, firstly, there are positive examples in so many different countries. There is, as I said at the very start, it's not without hope. I think you have to be slightly careful if you're saying, if I was going around saying, oh, look at us, how good we are, and do it, yeah.
We see what Ireland has done. How can we learn from that and act on it? And not just Ireland, but also so many other communities.
I used to always say to Ed Markey, the senator now, I used to say, if Mrs. Murphy can do it in West Kerry, it'll inspire Mrs. Murphy in Massachusetts to do it. I think there can be ways in which you cross over. I do think you need both this top down, and Pope Leo actually in his address at Castel Gandolfo 3 weeks ago, when there was a 10th anniversary Raising Hope conference on climate change, I was surprised at what he said, that he was quite political. He was saying to people, get involved politically, get it. And he was saying, yes, you need both this individual conversion, but he said very clearly, you also need the top-down political international decision-making. If we're to have a system where it isn't just me carrying all the weight of the world, you do need the political system to set the conditions that it will help it ignite elsewhere. And that is varied. I mean, the first one to address the North-South divide, you need to address the global financial systems, where, as Mia Motley says, you've developing countries borrowing at 15% and developed at 5%. And unless we start addressing some of those fundamental, and that means changing some of the World Bank rules, and that's it's hard to kind of warm the cockles of anyone's heart with that. But that actually is what you need to do. And similarly, I believe in why these COP negotiations are important, go back to what I said, that you do actually allow for trade and investment to be multilateral. It is really important that global economic order exists so that it's not fragmented, it's not trade wars, it's trade cooperation around the transition. And that, again, is not something that the Mrs. Murphy in Massachusetts is going to necessarily do anything about, but it is responsible of the politicians to deliver it. And to a certain extent, the politicians' ability to do that depends on what Mrs. Murphy in Massachusetts thinks. It's the political capital that allows you to do the international negotiations, which you get from home, is what's missing at this moment in time. Political science trumps climate science every time. And if you don't have the political story right, then you won't get to be able to do the international mechanisms. And I can give an example. I can take an example of well, 2 weeks ago, there was an example. I'd been involved, I was working on it in the International Maritime Organization. We'd spent 10 years working on a mechanism to fund the switch from maritime fuels on the high seas to cleaner fuels. And we were eventually about to get there. And the American administration came to the IMO meeting in London 3 weeks ago and managed to get a vote to delay it, which is going to kill it. And that broke my heart, because I'm thinking, we had it ready and we had it agreed, and at the last minute we pulled it. And we have to create a political environment where that's not acceptable, where that's not, I will not vote for that. And I don't want to be party political here in any sense, but in truth, it's just a recent example of what you mean about international organization. Well, there was one that we've just lost, and we need to stop losing those sort of votes.
Yeah. On that score, and I look in this audience, and there are students, and there are faculty, and there are staff, and they all care about what you are saying. What can we do better? What role does research have to play in advancing the kind of work politics is doing and needs to do and sometimes fails to do? What can we do as educators to support the work on advancing sustainability? What message would you have for both students and faculty, but also for our administrators, about how to work to advance the mission of this school, what this school wants to be, which is a force for good?
I think, well, first you stick to the knitting of actually educating the next generation. That basic, I was saying to Jim the other day, I think I was saying that education of undergraduate students with respect and with values and with focus is sometimes, I think we can risk losing that sometimes. I don't get a sense Notre Dame is doing that, but I do think that's the most important. I went to University College Dublin. Cardinal Newman was the founder of the university, and he wrote that seminal text, "The Idea of a University." It's amazing. It's like a computer program text almost. It's very hard to read. It's kind of tough going, but my God, is it good? And is it as relevant today as it was? Was it the 1860s? I can't remember what year it was founded. My own college was founded. The way I read it, struggled through it was actually saying engage with the world. It was very direct about engagement with the world. And while people were seeing he's coming from a theological perspective, his engagement with the world was very practical and also engaged with each other within a college. The mix is important. I was talking to Larry the other day about this, and I do think there is a role for the universities, having looked after the knitting, to start think, what are the big challenges in this change? And I would say to the engineering departments, there is a huge challenge in how do we develop the power grid? It is all about the grid. And America's got a lousy grid. So if I was starting in America, I'd say, I want the best engineers here to start really, really thinking about how do we build out this grid? How do we connect to transmission grid? And I would bring down to the local, to the distribution grid. Sorry for being very technical, wonky, but it's those big challenges. What are the big challenges? It's how we develop the power grid. It is, I think the challenge is in the sort of work you're doing. Engage in the politics, engage in the international politics. And it is to engage. It is no use to us if it's all just for academic purposes. I do think it requires a powerful engagement. And that can be difficult for loads of different reasons. Independence, political pressures, but it does require significant engagement. And you could go down through. I was working over the weekend on this paper for the European Housing Advisory Board, and we were thinking. Take another example, architecture. We need to completely transform architecture. We need to transform the whole construction industry to do modular means of construction, to do embodied carbon in buildings, to change the whole systems, heating systems around it. So every architecture school is not really caught up with this, I think, and not advancing the sort of scale and level of skills. You could go down through each faculty. I don't know if you have a faculty of agriculture here.
We don't have it.
No, okay. But well, sorry, I come from the business school. Let's
business school.
Yeah. I worked in the business school in Dublin, in UCD. And I think the business school is where, and we will need business. We will need enterprise. We will need innovation that comes from business. But is the current business educate? You know that book, Donut Economics, from Kate Rayward? Yeah. Her utter critique of business and economic schools is absolutely correct. My first day in UCD, I did commerce as an 18-year-old boy. And I remember the very first class.
You don't look a day older.
Very first class, macroeconomics lecture, Jim Norton. First rule here, boys and girls, is that people are profit maximizers. And all the other assumptions work out from that. I'm not too sure that's true. I certainly didn't think it was true when I was an 18-year-old, and I still don't. I was very fortunate. A couple of years ago, I went to Harvard. I'm showing off now, as well as Notre Dame. And my dad sent me over to say with one message, will you please give out to them, because he was involved in banking and this whole targets-based lending and that whole banking system which tripped us up in Ireland. And he said, would you please critique them of that, which I did. They very quickly came back and said, oh, that wasn't us. That was the Chicago School of Economics. We just didn't correct them. But so you go through each school. We are at a point of systemic change. But going back to the reason why I think the theology school here is more important than any of the others, that actually, if you don't address it from that perspective, I think the School of the Arts and the School of Philosophy are equally important as theology in this regard. But actually, if we're not coming with that scale of a horizon before us, if it's just done in a piecemeal way through the architecture or engineering or other schools, we won't make the leap in consciousness we need to make. And I think that's why I start with the School of Theology as the place where this begins, and the arts.
Billy, do I have time for one more question, or this is it?
We started 10 minutes later, so we can push it another 10 minutes. But
Well, I just wanted to make one observation that we don't call it Harvard, we call it Notre Dame of the East. One last question. How can we strengthen, you mentioned how Notre Dame is already doing a lot in Ireland. How can we strengthen what we are doing in Ireland? How can we partner with institutions in Ireland, and what advice would you have for us to do that?
I think what you're doing is on the right. We were chatting earlier on that the work you're doing with the Arun Institute, isn't it, in assessing what is the future for how we manage relations towards the United Ireland, which I would like to see. That's really good work. I think it's actually what's really important at the moment. Like all Irish people, I came here as an illegal immigrant in '84. I was only here for 6 months, but I was still had to get through customs with my fake letter to my cousin Kathy. Thank you, Kathy, for inviting me. And I'm not going to be working at all, officer. But we grew up in a family, a typical Irish family, where my mother had first cousins on Long Island and upstate New York. And also then there was huge crossover and back, because there was the likes of me going over for 6 months. That has currently stopped, in effect. So not the cousins are still there, but they're now second cousins. And the idea that you come here and work for, and is much more difficult. And I do think there is a risk and a loss that would exist, really be deep, if the incredible bonds between the two were not maintained. I'm sure Geraldine Bernason must have said this the other day when she was here. But that connection is not insignificant. Our roots are deep. I mean, our constitutional democratic republic was inspired by the American Constitution more than any other. When you start, I briefly played the fiddle at home. When you did so, the first lesson, it was different to the economics class. First lesson was you played the Rights of Man, the hornpipe. Thomas Paine, when he published his book, it was published in New York. 6 weeks later, it was published on a publisher's on Grafton Street in Dublin. The queue went up Grafton Street and around Stephen's Green. And so that influence, and it does go both ways. So I think actually what Notre Dame is doing is really important. And I go back to Ian Kite's work and others. It's even understanding that, so that understanding the complexities of it and the failings of it and all the other, like a family acknowledging that, it's not always been easy or good, being honest about that. I do think Notre Dame has a real role to play in maintaining that connection. It's not ever going to go away. We're neighbours. We're tiny, but we're 40 million here, 30 million, whatever number it is. And I do think at a time, particularly when that is at risk because of what's happening geopolitically, it's really important we hold on to it. In the cultural, in the social, in the spiritual, not just in the economic or in the, I think it's the deeper connections are the ones that will hold.
This is amazing. Thank you so much, Eamon. I mean, I am blown away by how carefully you listened to and answered the questions and engaged with them, being present and being intentional. It is mind-boggling. Thank you so much. We are grateful.
I wonder if we might even, if Eamon, if you're willing, if we might just take a question or two from the floor, particularly from any students who might have an interest, if we can impose on you for just a moment or two more, and I'll give Ariel the microphone and see if we can tempt any of you.
Hi, Eamon. Thanks a million for being here today. It was lovely to meet you as well earlier. But I guess my question is, my own father's a marine pilot in Port of Cork, down in the south of Ireland. And in recent years, I've really seen how central the port has become to climate plans, and in particular offshore wind plans, particularly in hoping to reduce our emissions by 2030. And I guess besides other countries imposing barriers to our own plans, what are the biggest barriers in making this transition run smoothly? Is it skills? Is it infrastructure? Is it money? That's my question. And I know that, yeah.
We're going to go very hyper-local here because my mother and father were from Cork, and I know Keough, your home, and I've spent a lot of recent years as Minister of Energy actually going around the Port of Cork looking for sites to where would we put the industry that will come with this power, and the power is going to come. Offshore wind is a very, very mainstream now, competitive power. So we're in the middle of auction process for the waters just off the Waterford Cork coast, and it'll come ashore in Cork and it'll come ashore in Waterford. And one of the characteristics of this new industrial revolution is that I think the industry will go to where the power is. And so and ports will be really significant. It's not good news for Indiana, which maybe it has inland ports, but so that those ports which have the capability of delivering it will be hugely successful. Cork is going to thrive on it. What's delaying it? It's part of what's everywhere seeing in different, to get through planning and to get public support is difficult. And it's the long lead times is what's making it expensive because it's such a large capital project. And that's then difficult because the character of the revolution, you want to bring people with you. You don't want to just force it through. So you want to do consultation. You really do. And you want to do set high environmental standards. You don't want to damage the environment as you're doing it. So, but at the same time, you want to be fast. So it is difficult. I think there's a good example. I said earlier on about one of the stories we have of real success is in building interconnectors. The Irish grid company, EirGrid, which is one of the best in the world, if there's any grid engineers here, we can hook you up. They lost the public in the 2010, 2014 for a variety of political reasons as much as anything else. But then they looked at a new grid plan, Shaping Our Future, it was called. And it was the most detailed consultation process. And then it came to start building. So the first, as I said, we got through to the UK, between UK and Wales, and a new interconnector. There wasn't a single objection. There wasn't a single delay. It has come on. It's working today. Huge benefit to Ireland and UK. The interconnector from France, and just to explain this technology, it's HVDC, high voltage direct current. It is what it says on the tin. It's direct current. It's like pulling a taut rope. So you don't lose power as you pull it over that 800 kilometers or roughly. They were going to come in, their ideal location was to come in near Youghal, down the road from you. And they moved it 20 kilometers closer to Carrigaline, closer to Glanthon, in fact. And it was less optimal, but it would probably just give less opposition. And because they made that shift at a local level, they didn't get a single objection in the planning process. And it's, as we speak, they're laying the cable. So it's weird. This is one of the hardest things, contradictions in climate, is that you have to festine lente. You have to hasten slowly. You have to actually start by listening, asking for help, not telling people what to do or what we're going to do, admitting uncertainties, all the difficulties of that. And I think EirGrid did that in that example. So that cable is coming ashore. That power is going to be there. And I think the offshore wind will come in the same way. And then the question is, where do you use it? I would use Whitegate across this port from you in Rinnaskiddy and the old net nitrate site. Those three sites, I think, are where we've got the space to put the industrial development in. Good news for Rust Belt states is Rust Belt sites are the perfect place to be able to put in this. If you match renewable power with your Rust Belt locations, much easier to get it through. And so actually, for Rust Belt states, there's the opportunity, I think, to be part of this. You'd have to build big wind and you'd have to put in big solar and storage and so on, but that's all economically viable now. And use brownfield sites, the ones I mentioned to you, are the places we should put the industry to go with the power.
So you mentioned that Ireland is investing a lot in solar and wind, and I was wondering, is Ireland investing at all in nuclear energy? And if not, why do you think that they aren't?
Good question, similar to that earlier today from a student. The Green Party would have come from an anti-nuclear tradition, and mainly because of nuclear arms proliferation, but also concern about nuclear leaks and so on. And Ireland was about to build a nuclear plant back in the 80s, and it was our Woodstock moment in Carnstor Point where we said no, and a big rock concert. And ever since, it's been verboten. I don't think it should be verboten now. I think we should open the possibility of nuclear, because the climate challenge is so huge. But I don't think Ireland is going to get nuclear anytime soon, because it is twice the price of the renewable alternative. And even with these new modular reactors, they're still twice the price. And actually, they're not. I used to always have great fun people be pushing nuclear and kind of say, yeah, can you show me the brochure, please? Can you show me the catalogue with the price and the delivery? There isn't one. Now, there may be half a dozen that built in the next 10 years, but it's a minute fraction of a percent of what will come from the solar revolution. Well, you know this in India and Pakistan and elsewhere. They're building coal, they're building nuclear, but actually what they're building is solar at scale. And solar combined with batteries, combined with grid, is where the industrial revolution is going. And demand management, which is flexible. So your heat pumps will heat people's homes. They're the better technology. And you can turn them on and turn them off when the wind is blowing, and you can store the heat in water. It gives you that balancing capability. Electric vehicles, it's game over. Electric vehicles in 10, 15 years' time are going to be the car system because they're better cars. We won't force people into something through worse technologies. It'll be better technologies. And similarly, I power my car at 2 a.m. when the power is dirt cheap and when the grid wants you to use it. And it's all that the countries and economies that are going to be successful are who's really good at this flexible use and the really clever grid management. That's where the Model Ts are coming out now doing that, if you know what I mean, not in every aspect. It's going to be the electrification of everything. Nuclear will play a part of it, but I think a relatively marginal part, unless there's some innovation in fusion or in modular reactors. But even if there is, I don't see it for 20 years. So I think I wouldn't rule out nuclear. And I think we need to get away from it being a culture war issue where, that we need to get away from that in every aspect, including in energy. But just on energy policy terms alone, I think nuclear is just going to be too expensive. And modular reactors have a slight problem. They do have plutonium in them. So you won't be shipping them all around the world. Here's a plutonium source, among other things. Weapons grade.
Eamon, thank you so much for taking extra time to also take questions from the audience. And thank you to all the people who are in the audience, all of you who came and stayed for this incredible, scintillating conversation. Thank you so much.